Hello. We have thus far considered the Heckscher-Ohlin model of international trade. And the purpose of this video lesson is then to consider some of the interesting implications of the Heckscher-Ohlin model. So remember, in its original form, the Heckscher-Ohlin model is this kind of 2 times 2 times 2 model with two countries, two goods, two factors of production. And many economists like to work with this kind of theoretical model economies. And of course, this model has been extended in many ways. It's relatively easy to introduce more than two countries and more than two goods. But essentially, in all the extensions, also the comparative advantage comes from the relative abundance of labor or capital, as the original Heckscher-Ohlin theorem also suggests. So three of the notable implications of the model. So if we analyze this model further, we can also have some additional interesting results. The first of them, known as the Rybczynski Theorem, states that if a country experiences an increase in the supply of one factor, it will produce more of the product whose production is intensive in that factor and less of the other product. So, for example, endowment of labor or capital can change over time. So, for example, if there is large-scale immigration, then the labor force of a country can increase. And then this Rybczynski theorem would suggest that if the labor force increases due to immigration, then the country will export more labor-intensive products. The second result, known as the factor price equalization theorem, states that given all the assumptions of the Heckscher-Ohlin model, then free international trade will lead to international equalization of the individual factor prices, namely labor and capital. So if there is, so that means that wage rates and capital returns, namely profits, would be equal across countries. So of course, then if they have like large wage differences, there would be also motivation for workers to migrate to another country to enjoy higher wages. The last result, known as Stolper-Samuelson Theorem, states that free international trade benefits the abundant factor and harms the scarce factor. So if we think about the owners of capital and workers who enjoy the wages, that when countries open up to trade, then the owners of the abundant factor benefit and the owners of the scarce factor then are losing. So let's take an illustrative example of the Stolper-Samuelson theorem, and I took it from this core textbook Economy 1.0. So let's consider this kind of actual example between the USA and China. So this figure indicates 4 pies with red and blue colors. So the top row pies, they refer to the USA, and the bottom part is China. And the left column is situation with limited trade. So we can think about the situation in the early 70s, for example. And then the right ones are with greater trade. So this could be, for example, the situation today. So the red color part of the pie indicates the wages. So there is both a percentage, and in parentheses it could be the absolute figure. For example, then the wages in dollars, or wage income in dollars. And then now if we think about this, what happens when we start with this situation with limited trade. So think about the early 1970s. So USA used to be the world's most capital abundant economy at that time, and as a result of this, then the share of profits was relatively small in the USA, because the capital would be so abundant, capital returns would be relatively low compared to the wages at that time. Whereas in China, it's the opposite. China has an enormous workforce, and in the early 70s, the capital was extremely scarce. So the capital returns would be very, very high at that time. And the sizes of the pies are normalized so that the total size is equal to 1 in this initial situation without trade. So then we know from this theory of comparative advantage and also from the Heckscher-Ohlin model that opening up the trade will benefit both countries. So in this example, we see 30% growth in the pie in the USA and 40% growth of the pie in China. But here comes this interesting feature of the Heckscher-Ohlin model, which the Ricardian theory of comparative advantage doesn't really manage to capture. So what happens to this shares of wage income and capital profits? So consider first the situation in the USA. So according to the Stolper-Samuelson theorem, the owners of the abundant factor in the USA, that would be the capital. So owners of capital in the USA would benefit from opening of the trade. And indeed, in this example, with greater trade, so if you think about the situation today with the large-scale trade, then capital owners have now taken a much larger share of the pie, 45% in this example. And the share of wages has been decreasing from 75% to 55%. And notice that not only the relative share of the wage income has decreased, but also in absolute terms, the wages have wage earnings have decreased from 0.75 to 0.72 in this example. So that can of course, if we think that this example is somewhat realistic, that can explain why this kind of wage earners have been dissatisfied with this trade with China and globalization in general, and that can partly also explain why for example, the popularity of Donald Trump in the presidential elections. If we consider the situation of China, in China, notice that the abundant factor was labor and still is labor. So the Chinese workers have benefited from the trade in this example. Notice that the share of the wage earnings has increased from 50% to 60%, and also in absolute term. So Chinese workers have benefited from the increase in trade. So the size of the pie becomes bigger, and the workers' share of the pie has also increased. So according to Stolper-Samuelson theorem, then the scarce factor will lose in this kind of case. So indeed, in China, then the share of profits decreased in this example from 50% to 40%. Still, the increase in the size of the pie is enough to compensate. So in absolute term, the profits also increased in China. So this is why in China there is not such kind of large-scale discontent with the trade. So in this example illustrates that in China, even though this share of capital has decreased in relative terms, it still in absolute term has been growing. So the purpose of this example is to illustrate that how this kind of even though the trade increases the size of the pie, it can treat the capital owners and workers in a different way. And in this example, the US workers have lost not only their relative share, but also lost in absolute terms, even though the size of the pie has increased. And this has, of course, enormously important also political implications in a democratic country like the USA. So in the next lesson, then I will we will consider the empirical findings of the empirical support for the Heckscher-Ohlin theorem and consider the famous Leontief paradox. See you then. Bye-bye.